On the morning of April 18, 1906, San Francisco looked so ordinary, so confidently alive, that no one could imagine the city was only minutes away from one of the most devastating disasters in American history. And that very normality is what makes the moment so haunting. Bakers were already awake, pulling warm bread from ovens as the smell drifted into narrow streets. Dock workers moved with routine precision along the busy waterfront, and cable cars climbed the hills carrying clerks, shop owners, and school children who believed the day would unfold like any other. The city had grown used to prosperity, used to movement, used to believing that tomorrow would always arrive on schedule. San Francisco was a place where fortunes were made quickly and lost just as fast, yet faith in progress remained unshaken. Beneath the cobblestones and wooden buildings, however, immense geological forces had been tightening for decades, silently waiting. The tragedy of that morning lies not only in the destruction that followed, but in how peacefully life was flowing right before the ground betrayed every assumption the city had built itself upon. In the years leading up to the earthquake, everyday life in San Francisco was defined by ambition, diversity, and constant motion, shaped by the aftermath of the gold rush and the city's role as the most important port on the West Coast. Immigrants from China, Italy, Ireland, and dozens of other regions lived side by side, working long hours in laundries, factories, restaurants, and shipping yards, all contributing to a city that never truly slowed down. Market Street bustled with horse-drawn carriages, early automobiles, and electric streetcars competing for space, while elegant hotels and theaters stood proudly beside modest boarding houses. Families gathered in public parks on Sundays, newspapers were read aloud in cafes, and conversations about business, politics, and opportunity filled the air. Many buildings were constructed quickly and cheaply to meet the demands of a booming population, a fact few questioned at the time. The city felt permanent, confident in its growth, unaware that its foundations, both literal and symbolic, were dangerously fragile. Daily routines continued with comforting predictability, reinforcing the illusion that San Francisco was stable and secure despite occasional tremors that locals had learned to ignore. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks each morning, believing hard work would guarantee success, while children memorized lessons in classrooms built on reclaimed land that had once been part of the Bay. The wealthy hosted lavish dinners illuminated by gaslight, discussing art, railroads, and international trade, while working-class families found joy in small rituals like evening meals and neighborhood gatherings. Churches prepared for morning services, ships prepared to unload cargo, and the city prepared for another profitable day. No alarms were raised, no warnings issued, because the science of earthquakes was poorly understood, and the past had given no reason to panic. That is what makes the story of San Francisco before 1906 so unsettling, because it was not a city waiting for disaster, but one deeply immersed in ordinary life, trusting that the ground beneath it would remain loyal. As the early hours passed, the city moved deeper into its familiar rhythm, unaware that this sense of normalcy was built on borrowed time and misplaced confidence. San Francisco's residents had learned to see their city as resilient, shaped by fire, floods, and economic crashes, yet always rebuilding stronger, and this belief created a quiet arrogance toward nature itself. Wooden homes lined entire neighborhoods, chosen for speed and cost rather than safety, while brick and stone structures rose without the reinforcements that modern engineering would later demand. Gas lines ran beneath streets without regulation, and water mains were poorly planned, a hidden vulnerability no one discussed over morning coffee. People trusted what they could see, bustling streets, thriving businesses, and full harbors, and ignored what they could not, the unstable fault lines stretching silently beneath the city. In hindsight, every detail feels like a warning sign, yet at the time it all blended into the background of progress, where the future seemed guaranteed simply because the present looked successful. The waterfront was among the busiest places that morning, serving as the economic heartbeat of the city, where cargo ships from Asia and South America brought goods that fueled San Francisco's growth. Longshoremen unloaded crates of tea, silk, machinery, and produce, their movements guided by experience rather than urgency, while merchants checked ledgers and negotiated prices with confidence. Nearby, ferries prepared to carry commuters across the bay, whistles cutting through the morning air as passengers lined up without impatience. The port symbolized San Francisco's connection to the wider world, a city that saw itself as modern, global, and unstoppable. Few realized that within hours, this same waterfront would be choked with refugees, smoke, and confusion, its orderly structure collapsing into chaos. At that moment, however, it was simply another workday, and the routines that defined it gave people comfort, reinforcing the belief that tomorrow would look much like today. In residential neighborhoods, the morning unfolded quietly, marked by small human moments that history would later freeze in tragic contrast. Families shared breakfast tables, children argued over chores, and neighbors exchanged casual greetings across fences, unaware that these ordinary interactions would soon become memories of a vanished world. In Chinatown, one of the most densely populated areas, narrow streets filled with early shoppers and shopkeepers opening doors, while in wealthier districts, servants prepared homes for the day's activities. Schools were beginning to stir, offices were unlocking their doors, and the city collectively inhaled before the rush of full daylight. There was no sense of urgency, no fear in the air, only the calm expectation of routine. This is why the story of San Francisco before the earthquake matters so deeply, because it captures a moment when human confidence and natural power stood unknowingly opposed, with life unfolding gently just before it was violently torn apart. Just before dawn fully gave way to morning, the city rested in a fragile balance, suspended between night's quiet and the coming rush of the day, with no sign that the balance was about to shatter. Clocks in homes and businesses ticked forward in steady rhythm, marking time with the comforting promise of continuity, while street lamps still glowed faintly in some neighborhoods. The mild coastal air carried familiar sounds, distant hooves on pavement, the hum of early machinery, and the soft murmur of voices starting another day. San Francisco had endured small earthquakes before, minor tremors that rattled windows and were quickly forgotten, and this past experience lulled residents into believing that nothing truly catastrophic could happen. The city's identity was rooted in survival and reinvention, and that history bred confidence rather than caution. No one paused to question whether the ground itself could turn against them with overwhelming force, because nothing in their daily lives suggested such a possibility. When the earthquake finally struck at 5:12 a.m., it did not arrive as a single violent moment, but as a terrifying sequence that shattered the illusion of stability almost instantly. Buildings groaned and twisted as if awakening in pain. Streets rippled like water, and the familiar cityscape transformed into something unrecognizable within seconds. People were thrown from beds, walls collapsed inwards, and the sound was unlike anything witnesses had ever heard, a deep, roaring thunder that seemed to rise from the earth itself. In those first moments, confusion ruled, as residents struggled to understand whether the shaking would stop or worsen, and whether their homes would survive another heartbeat. The everyday routines of minutes earlier were erased in an instant, replaced by fear, darkness, and the realization that nothing could be trusted, not even the ground beneath their feet. As the shaking subsided, a new and even more destructive threat emerged, revealing how unprepared the city really was for a disaster of this scale. Broken gas lines ignited fires across multiple neighborhoods, and with water mains shattered by the quake, firefighters were left nearly powerless to contain the spreading flames. What had been a bustling, confident city only moments before now faced a catastrophe that would burn for days, consuming homes, businesses, and entire districts. Survivors stumbled into the streets in shock, some injured, some searching for loved ones, all grappling with the sudden collapse of the world they knew. The contrast between the calm of that earlier morning and the chaos that followed is what makes the story of San Francisco before the 1906 earthquake so powerful, because it reminds us how quickly normal life can vanish and how fragile even the most prosperous cities truly are.